So the Bhagavad Gita is like a sangam. It's a confluence. Now, a sangam may be a confluence of two or more rivers. The Bhagavad Gita is a confluence of many philosophies. It is the ultimate book that represents the religions of the subcontinent. It contains Sankhya, it contains Yoga, it contains Vedanta, it contains so many philosophies altogether. And it draws its authentication from the roots it has in the Upanishads. And as it has been said that Krishna is the cowherd boy, the Upanishads are the cows. And Krishna milks the Upanishads or the cows and gives us the butter and cream in the Upanishads, from the Upanishads. So indeed, this is the Bhagavad Gita. It contains not just all the darshanas of the Vedas, but it also contains the cream of the Upanishads. So last time I was covering the Kathopanishad, and I had just concluded when we were going to discuss the 11th section of the Kathopanishad, which is Urdhva Mulo Vak Shakha Esho Ashvatas Sanatana, that there is a tree in the universe which has its roots above and the branches below. Contrary to the way trees grow on the earth, which have the roots below and the branches above. And this tree is Sanatana, it is eternal. And you will find again in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, in the first verse, Urdhva Moolam Adha Shakam Ashwatam Prahur Avyayam Chandansi Yasya Parnani Yastam Vedana Vedavit. So Krishna says in the first verse of the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, they speak of an eternal Ashwatha tree with its roots above and its branches below. Once again, Urdhva Moolam Adha Shakam. That's there, directly taken from the Kathopanishad. And while a lot of the 15th chapter begins with several verses which describe the tree and the gunas from which they spring and the sense organs, right? When we go to the Kathopanishad directly states, right in the beginning, that the root of the tree lies in Brahman. And it is from this Brahman that the rest of the world emerges through this Ashwatha tree. And it points out that for fear of Brahman, the sun rises and sets. For fear of Brahman, the wind blows, and so on and so forth. So you find that the Kathopanishad has verses that directly have been reflected in the Bhagavad Gita. So today I want to discuss with you another Upanishad, which gives in essence and in principle what the Bhagavad Gita is trying to say. So in the Bhagavad Gita, There is, as I said, a confluence, a synthesis, a syncretism. It is, shall we say, a amalgam of various philosophies that come together. And when it talks of various philosophies that come together, Krishna actually brings them together in a way that is non-contradictory. He brings contradictory philosophies and brings them around to create a message which is totally non-contradictory. And we find this also in the Ishopanishad. So in the Ishopanishad, the invocation is very interesting. And the invocation in the Ishopanishad is Om Purnam Ada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Shishyate. That God is perfect and He is complete. And all that comes from God is also perfect and complete. In fact, this verse itself is an all-inclusive philosophy, which if you understand the philosophy in the first invocation of the Ishopanishad, your life itself will be perfect. It will be Purnam. Because indeed what it is saying is that you are perfect. Everything around you is perfect. And indeed the universe is perfect. And the events unfolding around you are also perfect. It is because of a defect in your vision that you cannot understand this. Just like if you have the need for glasses with which to see the world, if you're suffering from myopia, your world will appear like a blur, especially if you have a very high number. But the moment your optician places the correct number on your nose and you can look through the glasses, suddenly the world appears perfect. So also, this world, this universe, your life and you're all perfect. And it is indeed your inability to see perfection that leads to suffering. So, even in the Bhagavad Geeta, Krishna clearly points out that, he gives Divya Drishti to Arjun. He shows Arjun that indeed what has happened? The war has already come to an end. All the enemies have entered into death. And indeed, Arjun and his brothers are victorious. So he's telling him the end, even before it has begun. He tells him, Vedaham samatitani vartmani charjana bhutani cha bhavishyani imam tu vedna kaschana. Indeed, he says, I know the past, I know the present, I know the future of all living entities. But me, Krishna says, nobody knows. So here in the Ishopanishad, you find the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita condensed in 18 verses. And in these 18 verses, the Bhagavad Gita philosophy is encapsulated. For example, Krishna tells him to just go ahead. This is your prarabdha. You have come to this point in your life. You just have to do your duty. You follow your duty and you will be successful. So, similarly, in the second mantra of the Ishopanishad, the Lord says, Kurvan evaha karmani jijivise chatam samaha evam tvai nanyetosti na karma lipyate naraha. If you can live for 100 years, if without being tortured by greed and acquisitiveness and desire to show that you are better than the next person, if you simply take what is your due in life, what is in your natural prarabdha, and if you work in that way, you will work in a spirit of devotion and renunciation to the Lord. And this will not bind you to the law of karma. Indeed, in the Bhagavad Geeta, Krishna says that Yagnartharth karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. That if you perform your actions simply as an offering to the Lord, right? No action will bind you. And that's given in the first verse of the Ishopanishad. Isa vashyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjita ma grida kasya siddhanam. Everything in the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. Therefore, only accept those which are your natural prarabdha, which are set aside as your quota, and do not accept anything else, knowing fully well that this belongs to God. So if you work as a yajna, then the performance of a yajna leads to the second verse, which we just did. Kurvahan eva karmani jijivisek chatam samaha evam tvai nanyetosti na karma lipyate nare. So indeed, if you continue working in this way, you will be no longer bound to karma. So in the third verse of the Ishopanishad, Krishna goes on, or rather the Lord goes on here, and he explains that those who neglect the soul, the spirit, which one is, you enter into the planets of the faithless. You enter, if you go to Asurya Loka, Asurya Namate Loka Andhena Tamasavrita. So if you enter into the planets where atheists dwell, and of course into places where there is tremendous suffering. And it goes on to describe the qualities of God, that he is faster than the mind, and he is greater than all the gods. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Name vidu sura gana prabhavam na maharishya. All this is reflected here in the Ishopanishad. And if you go to the Bhagavad Gita and you find out Sarvata Pani Padam Tat Sarvata Akshi Shiromukam Sarvata Shruti Maloke Sarvam Avrityati Stati. He talks about the Lord whose face is everywhere, whose ears are everywhere, and so on and so forth. And here in the Ishopanishad also, these qualities of God are directly defined and explained. But I would like to go to the most important parts where they concur, where the Bhagavad Gita and the Ishopanishad concur. And the most important parts where the Ishopanishad concurs is essentially in its philosophy of life. As I told you, there's been a constant tension, or there's been a constant conflict, or two paths that diverge One path that diverges is the path of external renunciation, and one path that goes ahead is the path which follows the path of performing one's duty, performing one's Vedic karmas, and proceeding in one's life. So, in the Ishopanishad, for the first time, before the Bhagavad Gita, you find that those who pursue avidya go into the darkest region of ignorance. Worse still are those who are engaged in the culture of knowledge. This is a very critical verse. Andham tamaha pravishyanti ye avidyam upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo ya vidyam rataha. So according to the Bhagavad Gita, it is so important that we must know what is avidya, and we should also know what is vidya. Avidya essentially, vidya essentially refers to the study of the Vedas, and it deals with that study of knowledge which lies within oneself. Whereas avidya essentially deals with the things of the world. So the study of that which is perishable is known as avidya. The study of that which is imperishable is known as vidya. But we live two worlds. One is the world that lies inside of us, and one is the world that lies outside of us. To understand and study the knowledge of things that lie outside of us is to have knowledge of the world, which is called avidya. Those who follow that alone go into great darkness, Ishopanishad says. Whereas those who pursue that knowledge of what lies inside oneself, amazingly, the Ishopanishad says, they go into even greater darkness. But those who pursue avidya and vidya side by side, because one result is derived from the culture of vidya, one result is followed by the study of vidya. But when one learns to study both side by side, you can transcend the confluence, the influence of birth and death, and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. Because when you follow the things of the world, when you understand the world, right, you fully understand what is required in the world. In case you haven't got it, he repeats again in the 12th and in the 13th chapter. He says very clearly, Andham tamah pravishyanti ya sambhutam upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo ya sambhutam sambhutyam ratah. Andham tama pravishyanti ya asambhutim upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo ya sambhutyam ratah. Those who worship the multiplicity that lives in this world, all the devatas, and those who worship the impersonal absolute also go into great darkness. So if you worship the things of the world and you worship things that lie within you, you need to do both. Just like the two wings of the bird, there are people who say, no, I believe in science, I don't believe in studying spirituality. And then there are those who say that I believe in spirituality, I don't believe in science. But you find in the Ishopanishad that those who follow both, they are happy in this world and in the next. The same thing you will find in the Bhagavad Gita. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, while Krishna certainly tells you not to be taken in by Veda, Vada, Ratha, Partha, Nanya, Dastiti, Vadina, don't get taken in by people who are speaking flowery words of the Vedas, right? And he also tells Arjuna that Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nishtraigunya Bhavarjuna Nirdvandvo Nitya Sattvasto Niryogakshyam Atmava. But on the other hand, Krishna is telling Arjun in the 3rd chapter that the Lord has created this system which is put down in the Vedas. This system where one performs fire sacrifice. And the recipients of this fire sacrifice are Devtas. And by nourishing the Devtas, Devtas nourish you. And one must follow this path of sacrifice, because one who lives life without performing sacrifice is truly a thief. Sthena eva shah. So you have to clearly understand that while Krishna does not want you to follow the worship of the Devtas for material benefit and fruit, like going to heaven, coming back in a superior body with more wealth and knowledge and beauty, he wants you to follow the system. And he wants you to follow the system of Vedic sacrifice simply because it is a system that is put in place by the Lord. So in the Ishopanishad, he clearly recommends that the things of the world and the things of the inner world, the things of matter and that of spirit, you must know both. And when you know both, truly, you will have both wings of the bird and you will be able to fly, achieving happiness in this world and immortality in the next. So, Bhagavad Gita, as I said, brings about a confluence between opposing philosophies that were there at one time, where people are performing Vedic sacrifice. And Vedic sacrifice was being performed for going to heaven, for getting better birth next time in a more beautiful body with more knowledge and more aristocratic birth and so on and so forth, more wealth. But Krishna pointed out that yes, you have to perform all your religious duties and ceremonies, but you must do them in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion. You must do them without desiring the fruit. And that will make you the true yogi and the true sannyasi. Anashritah karma phalam karya karma karoti yah sa sannyasi cha yogi cha na niragnir na chakriyah. One who performs his God-given duties in a spirit of sacrifice to the all-pervading Lord, he indeed is the true sannyasi and the true yogi, not one who lights no fire and does no work. So it's very important to understand that there are things of this world and there are things that lie in the world within. I think it was Jesus who said Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give unto God that which is God's. And people tried to trap him, and they showed him a coin with Caesar on it. And they said, what shall we do with this coin? Should we give it as taxes to the Caesar, or should we keep it for God? So Jesus said, give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give unto God that which is God's. Indeed, this is the message of the Ishopanishad, this is the message of the Bhagawad Geeta, that we need to have knowledge of the world and we need to have knowledge of the spirit. We need to perform and fulfill all the obligations that we have in this world, and we also need to have fulfillment of the obligations we have to the spirit, to God. And when we do both, we will be personally qualified for salvation. So also uniquely in this Ishopanishad, he says that his main activity is to fulfill the desires of everybody, which I think is a very wonderful and unique statement that he has made. That indeed God fulfills everyone's desire. You have desires, don't worry, God is fulfilling them. You only have to be careful that you don't have conflicting desires. So if you want to have conflicting desires, then there's going to be a problem. But if you have single-pointed desires, which are core of your being, you want something, you can be sure that God is listening and that he will fulfill your desires. So I will pause here. If there are any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for the wisdom. So there are a couple of questions from the audience.
Yes.
So the first one is it enough to just understand the Ishopanishad if you don't have time to read the other Upanishads?
You don't need to read any Upanishads. If you read Bhagavad Geeta, it contains all the Upanishads.
Okay.
Whatever you need to know in the Upanishads are contained in the Bhagavad Geeta. You don't need to go and look into other Upanishads. This is my advice to you. Sometimes the search for spirituality, the search for God, should not become the search for more and more knowledge and more books and more lectures and more curiosity, and then the ego of being a jnani, that I know so much and I have read so many Upanishads and so on and so forth. It's important to understand one book, have one God, and be surrendered unto both, so that by remembering God and forgetting self, you will attain peace, perfection, and the supreme destination.
Okay, thanks, sir. Thanks for answering the question.
Also, the Ishopanishad, I said, even if you take the invocation, studying that itself is enough. If you reflect on that and you apply that to your life and your understanding of life, that itself will make you perfect. Forget about reading the rest of the Upanishad. Yes, any other questions?
Yeah, sir. There's one more question, which I think you've already answered, but I'll just ask nevertheless. So, why is knowledge obtained from the Ishopanishad a more important source of wisdom than that obtained through the mind, senses, and worldly experience?
Your senses are limited. You cannot see X-rays. You cannot see nuclear radiation. You cannot even see the full spectrum of light. When one crow looks at another, he sees a brilliantly purple-blue color. But when we see, we can't see that spectrum of light. So we see only a black crow. So indeed, our senses are limited. You can't hear everything. Even your dog can hear better than you. The idea of a dog whistle is a whistle that is silent to the human ear, but which is heard by the dog. So very often you buy a stereo system, which indeed gives you sound which is appreciated only by a dog. So indeed, you should understand that your senses are limited. And because your senses are limited, it is impossible for you to get much knowledge through the senses. And the mind, of course, receives knowledge through the senses. Whereas when you turn off the mind and you transcend the senses, you get a completely different appreciation of what is.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering the questions. And that's all we have for today.
All right. So then, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Jai Shri Krishna, Hari Om, Hare Krishna.